So I want you to imagine standing on the muddy banks of a river. But, it's not this calm, meandering little stream. The water is actually at flood state.
Yeah, right. It's totally raging.
Exactly. I mean, we are talking about something like 8.5 million cubic meters of water violently rushing past you every single year, just tearing up the banks, carrying all this heavy debris downstream.
Yeah, not a place you want to go for a swim.
Definitely not. And your new leader, the guy who literally just took over for a legendary historical figure, he looks at you and says, all right, step into the water. It's going to stop.
Which is terrifying.
Right. Like, would you actually do it? Because that is the high stakes, terrifying reality opening the book of Joshua. So, welcome to this deep dive into a text that is, well, equal parts ancient epic, historical puzzle, and a theological blueprint.
It's a massive topic.
It really is. But before we jump fully into, the ancient dirt and the massive geopolitical shifts of the Middle East, I want to take just a brief moment. I want to offer a really warm welcome to you, the listener, and offer a divine blessing for your day and for your entire upcoming week.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wherever you are, whatever you're doing right now while you listen, we just hope this exploration brings something truly enriching and thought-provoking to your life.
It really is a profound text to unpack.
Yeah.
I mean, we are looking at a book that challenges our modern sensibilities in like almost every possible way.
Oh, for sure.
Because today, we expect history to read like a sterile spreadsheet. We want this clean timeline of dates, verifiable events, objective facts.
We want the receipts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you step into the world of ancient Near Eastern literature, that spreadsheet framework just completely collapses. You are suddenly looking at a narrative that weaves together geographic borders, brutal ancient battles, nation building, and like high theology all at the exact same time.
Which is exactly why we are relying on insights from two really highly respected, comprehensive sources today. We're using the Holman and the NAA study Bibles.
Both fantastic resources.
Yeah, they really are. And our mission for you today is to figure out how this text functions simultaneously as a historical memory and, well, a highly complex rule book for a brand new nation.
And to understand the nuts and bolts of this book, we have to look at the massive narrative shadow hanging over it.
Right, the backstory.
Yeah, if you look at the first part of the biblical story, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the overarching theme there is redemption.
Like escaping Egypt.
Right. It's the story of God delivering the Israelites from brutal slavery in Egypt, leading them through the wilderness, and making a covenant with them at Mount Sinai. But as we open the book of Joshua, we step into the second act of that grand story.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the transition of leadership right here is critical. I mean, Moses, the monumental figure of the Exodus, the guy who essentially birthed the nation, he's dead.
Yeah, end of an era.
Literally. He got them to the edge, but he didn't take them in. So now the people of Israel are standing in the plains of Moab, looking across that raging Jordan River at the Promised Land.
And the theological shift at this precise moment is profound. Because for decades, the text portrayed God primarily as, a redeemer and a provider.
Manna from heaven, water from rocks, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But now the text pivots to present God as a divine warrior. The narrative tension just skyrockets because God is now actively leading his people into their promised rest through conquest.
Fulfilling those ancient land promises.
Yes, the bedrock promises made centuries earlier to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And Joshua is the guy now holding the spear. The text deliberately positions him as the new Moses.
It's a heavy mantle to pick up.
Seriously, just think about the literary symmetry here, though. Moses' foundational defining miracle as a leader was parting the Red Sea to let the people escape the Egyptian army. Yep. And now, Joshua's first major act as leader is miraculously crossing the Jordan River to enter Canaan. It is just this undeniable passing of the baton. The narrative is basically screaming to the reader, hey, this guy has the exact same authority as Moses.
And he absolutely needed that validation. I mean, keep in mind, the entire generation that witnessed the Red Sea crossing, they died in the wilderness.
Oh, true. This is a completely new demographic.
Right. It's a new generation of Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't seen the great deliverance from Egypt with their own eyes. They need their own defining moment of divine presence to really forge their national identity.
And the sources provide this unbelievable factual detail that really grounds this epic moment in gritty reality. I mentioned the water earlier, but the text explicitly notes that the Jordan River was at flood stage during this crossing.
Which is key context.
It is, because today, if you visit the Jordan River, it looks pretty tame. But our sources point out that up until the 1950s, before modern dams were built upriver that reduced the flow to like 850,000 cubic meters a year, the river was a totally different beast.
It was massive.
Yeah. Before those dams, 8.5 million cubic meters of water rushed down that southern stretch annually. So stepping into that raging, flooded water before it actually stopped flowing, that required immense, terrifying faith. It wasn't just a casual hike across a puddle.
No, not at all. And what's fascinating here is how a detail like that flood stage informs the way the book is designed to be consumed by an ancient audience.
How so?
Well, it is written to evoke suspense and heroism. It forces the reader to feel the palpable danger of those natural obstacles. The book of Joshua paints these heightened, vivid images of divine power intersecting with human frailty.
Like an ancient action movie.
Exactly. It functions as a historical record, but it's a history written from a prophetic or theological viewpoint.
Right.
The primary goal of the author wasn't just to leave a sticky note saying, hey, we crossed a river on a Tuesday.
Right.
The goal was to encode these timeless principles of courage, obedience, and community into the cultural DNA of every subsequent generation.
But, who is that author? Who actually wrote this epic down? Like, if it's this carefully constructed, highly stylized narrative, is it just Joshua sitting in his tent with a scroll after a long day of battle?
Well, the author is technically anonymous in the text itself. But the Talmud, which is the central text of Rabbinic Judaism, it traditionally attributes the authorship to Joshua.
With the exception of the ending, right?
Right, with the obvious exception of the very end of the book, which details his own death and burial. Obviously, he didn't write that.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing one guy wrote it all contemporaneously anyway, especially when our sources point out several linguistic clues that kind of complicate that traditional view.
Oh, the clues are definitely there. Throughout the book, you find this recurring phrase, to this day.
Oh, I've noticed that.
Yeah, the author will describe a monument being built or a city being named, and then add, and it remains there to this day. That phrasing strongly implies a later narrator is compiling or finalizing the historical record well after the events actually occurred.
Like they're looking back from a distance.
Precisely. Some scholars argue the final editing could have happened hundreds of years later, possibly even as late as the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC.
Wow, that late.
Well, yes and no. The source material also emphasizes that the core writings, the geographic data, and the cultural markers point heavily to origins in the 2nd millennium BC. So we are likely looking at a compilation of very ancient eyewitness records that were later polished and framed into the final epic form we have today.
Okay, so we have this ancient, polished epic of taking the land. And it reads like a blockbuster movie, walls tumbling down, overwhelming victories, kings hiding in caves.
A whole 9 yards.
Right. But does the dirt actually support the text? Like when archaeologists dig in the Levant, do they find the action movie the text describes?
That question sits at the center of a massive ongoing scholarly war. And the very first hurdle in that archaeological debate is simply figuring out the timeline.
Like when the conquest actually happened?
Exactly.
Wait, how do we not know when it happened? Doesn't the text give a timeline?
It gives a relative timeline, but it leaves out the one specific detail that would anchor it perfectly to secular history.
Let me guess. A name.
Yep. The name of the Egyptian pharaoh. The pharaoh of the Exodus is just called Pharaoh. So that leaves modern scholars violently debating between two main camps.
Okay, what are the camps?
One camp argues for a 15th century BC date, specifically around 1446 BC. And this is based on taking a literal reading of a verse in 1 Kings, which states the Exodus occurred exactly 480 years before King Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay, so that's the math approach. Let me guess. The other camp looks at the actual dirt rather than the math.
You nailed it. They look at destruction layers in the soil. The second camp argues for a 13th century BC date, around 1260 BC.
So about 200 years later.
Right. They argue that the cities mentioned in the biblical text show massive upheaval and destruction in the archaeological record during the 13th century, not the 15th.
Okay, so depending on when you think they arrived, you basically interpret the dirt differently. And our sources outline 4 distinct models that scholars have proposed for how this conquest actually played out on the ground.
4 very different models.
Yeah. The first one is the old model, which was championed by the famous archaeologist W.F. Albright. He essentially proposed that the biblical text should be read literally as a rapid, highly destructive military blitzkrieg across Canaan.
And Albright's model was incredibly popular for a time. But our sources note that it has largely collapsed under modern archaeological scrutiny.
Because the dirt didn't match.
Exactly. The evidence simply does not show a massive, simultaneous layer of fiery destruction across all Canaanite cities at the exact same time. The dirt doesn't support a single, sweeping blitzkrieg.
Okay, so if the scorched earth model is dead, how do we explain the Israelites suddenly owning the Central Highlands? Did they just, sneak in while no one was looking?
That is essentially the premise of the second theory, the peaceful infiltration model, proposed by Albrecht Alt.
Sneaking in slowly.
Yeah, this model suggests the Israelites were semi-nomadic pastoralists who just slowly trickled into the sparsely populated hill country over generations. They pitched their tents, built small villages, and eventually gained demographic dominance without massive sweeping wars.
I gotta say, I struggle with that one. The biblical text is absolutely dripping with military rhetoric. It doesn't sound like a peaceful camping trip that just got out of hand.
That's a fair point, which brings us to the third and perhaps most fascinating theory, the peasant revolt model, championed by George Mendenhall.
A peasant revolt.
Yeah. To understand this, you have to know that late Bronze Age Canaan was not a unified country. It was this chaotic collection of heavily taxed, highly corrupt city-states ruled by elite kings who were vassals to the Egyptian Empire.
Sounds miserable.
It was. So Mendenhall suggests that the Canaanite underclass, the heavily oppressed peasants, actually rebelled against their own corrupt overlords and joined forces with the incoming Israelites.
Almost like a localized French Revolution fueled by a new liberating theology.
Precisely. And proponents of this theory point back to a curious detail in the book of Exodus, which mentions a mixed multitude of people leaving Egypt alongside the Hebrews.
So they weren't entirely homogenous.
Right. This suggests early Israel was always a somewhat ethnically diverse group, united by a shared covenant with God, rather than a strict, closed bloodline. They absorbed the oppressed Canaanites right into their ranks.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then there are the endogenous models, which take that a step further and propose that early Israel didn't invade from the outside at all. They argue Israel actually emerged entirely from within Canaanite society as a cultural shift.
Which is a huge paradigm shift for scholars.
It is. But I have to jump in here with a really memorable detail from the sources that totally shifts how we view these early settlements. You know I love a good aha moment in the data.
Oh, I know you do. Let's hear it.
Okay, so when archaeologists conduct surface surveys in the central mountainous region of Canaan, they find a sudden, rapid proliferation of hundreds of small, new settlements starting in the 18th century BC.
Right, all these new highland villages.
Yeah, but the kicker is in their ancient trash pits. The inhabitants of these new villages strictly avoided eating pork. Archaeologists find 0 pig bones in their refuse,
Wow.
which is highly unusual because the surrounding coastal and Canaanite cultures ate pork regularly. It is incredibly tempting and logically sound to link these sudden, non-pork-eating highland villages to early Israelite pastoralists settling the land, bringing their unique dietary laws with them.
It is a phenomenal piece of material culture. And that slow proliferation of highland villages actually aligns perfectly with a crucial caveat about the book of Joshua that casual readers almost always miss.
What's that?
Well, we talked about Albright's failed blitzkrieg model.
Yeah.
The irony is, a careful reading of the biblical text itself actually portrays a remarkably slow, mostly non-destructive conquest.
Wait, really? Because the popular Sunday school conception is that Joshua just burned the entire map to the ground.
That is a total misreading of the text. The book explicitly states that the Israelites only burned 3 specific cities to the ground: Jericho, Ai, and Hazor.
Just 3.
That's it. The rest of the land, the towns, the infrastructure was largely taken intact. And logically, this makes perfect sense. They were migrating people. They needed houses to live in, wells to drink from, and terraced fields to harvest. They weren't trying to obliterate the land. They were trying to inherit a functioning economy.
That distinction is vital. But, the mention of those 3 destroyed cities leads us directly to the elephant in the room. We cannot do a deep dive into Joshua without talking about the most difficult, controversial aspect of the book.
The mandate for total destruction.
Yeah, the mandate for the total destruction of the native Canaanite populations. Our sources are very upfront about this. This is deeply troubling. To a modern reader, the command to wipe out men, women, and children sounds like state-sanctioned ethnic cleansing. It's incredibly hard to digest.
It is arguably the most challenging theological and moral hurdle in the entire Hebrew Bible.
And before we dive into how the text handles this, we want to be absolutely clear with you, our listener. We are not taking a side on the morality of these ancient texts.
No. Right.
We are not drawing modern political parallels, and we are definitely not endorsing a viewpoint. Our goal right now is purely to unpack how the source material itself internally justifies this to its ancient audience. Like, how did the ancient writers frame this violent mandate within their own worldview?
And to do that, we have to completely abandon our 21st century post-Enlightenment democratic framework.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about how fiercely we protect the separation of church and state today. Now, imagine a localized, ancient theocracy where that concept simply does not exist.
We're totally alien to them.
Completely.
Right.
The covenant Israel made at Sinai fused the church and the state into a single, indivisible entity. God was not just their deity. He was their literal geopolitical king. In that ancient context, idolatry or worshiping another god wasn't, a difference of religious opinion or an exercise in free speech.
Right.
It was literal capital high treason against the state and the divine king.
And that analogy is the key to unlocking their ancient worldview. When the sources unpack the theological defenses presented within the text, they break it down into four main arguments.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first is the concept of divine ownership. This is the foundational premise of the entire biblical narrative. God, as the creator of the universe, is the ultimate owner of all lands. Ancient peoples believed their local gods owned their specific borders, but the Israelites believed their God owned the entire map.
So he's the ultimate landlord.
Exactly. Therefore, as creator, he has the sovereign right to evict tenants and distribute territories to whomever he chooses.
Okay, I understand that ancient people found that argument satisfying, but for a modern audience, just saying God owns the land so he can evict people feels, terribly arbitrary. What is the text's second defense?
The second defense argues that the destruction is framed strictly as moral judgment, not ethnic eradication.
Meaning what, exactly?
The text goes out of its way, especially back in Leviticus, to state that the Canaanites are being removed because of extreme systemic moral corruption.
Oh, like the child sacrifice.
Yes, practices like child sacrifice and pervasive injustice that the biblical text views as an absolute cancer. The judgment is portrayed as the necessary surgical removal of a moral rot, not an arbitrary hatred of a specific race.
And that actually leads perfectly into the third point, which proves this wasn't about Israelite superiority at all. No double standards.
This is a huge point.
Yeah, the sources highlight that the text is brutally honest about Israel having absolutely no special merit. They weren't chosen because they were better people. In fact, the terrifying flip side of this covenant is that if Israel enters the land and adopts the exact same moral crimes and corruptions as the Canaanites, they will face the exact same divine wrath.
The consequences are identical.
Exactly. The text literally says the land will vomit them out, just like it did their predecessors. The standard is moral allegiance, not ethnic privilege.
Which is exactly what the biblical narrative records happening centuries later during the Babylonian exile. The Israelites broke the covenant, and they were forcibly removed. The rules applied equally.
And the fourth defense really drives the nail into the idea that this was about racial purity. It's about the exceptions to the rule. The military rhetoric regarding the conquest sounded absolute and unconditional, like, leave nothing alive. But in practice, the text spends significant time highlighting outsiders who survived and thrived.
Yes, the stories of Rahab and the Gibeonites are front and center for a reason. Rahab was a Canaanite woman living in Jericho. Furthermore, she was a prostitute, occupying the lowest rung of Canaanite society.
You couldn't get more of an outsider.
Right. Yet because she professed faith in Israel's God and hid the Israelite spies, she and her entire family were spared. She's fully integrated into the nation and actually becomes a matriarch in the Israelite bloodline.
That's incredible.
It is. And similarly, the Gibeonites, through a deceptive peace treaty, mind you, they surrender and are absorbed into the community. These exceptions are deliberately placed in the narrative to prove to the reader that survival was based entirely on allegiance to the divine king, not on bloodline or race. The door was always open for those who surrendered to Yahweh.
It fundamentally reframes the whole narrative. It moves it from a mindless ethnic purge to a highly regulated, albeit severe, theocratic judgment. It's heavy and it's uncomfortable, but understanding that internal ancient logic is absolutely key to reading the rest of the book.
It really is, Because once the initial fighting subsides and the land is acquired, the book pivots drastically. The second half of Joshua is completely different. We move from the bloody battlefield to the dry world of administration, boundaries, and covenant renewal.
Yeah, the blueprint phase. Reading chapters 13 through 21 can honestly feel like reading an ancient, endless spreadsheet of zip codes. Why did the author dedicate half the book to listing every single town, border, and clan?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire structure of the Book of Joshua brilliantly mirrors a widely used legal document of the time called an ancient Near Eastern suzerainty treaty.
Okay, let's define that. A suzerain is basically an emperor or a superior great king. And a vassal is the lesser king or nation that serves them, right?
Exactly. In the ancient world, when a great king conquered a territory, he would write up a treaty granting land and protection to a vassal. In return, the vassal owed absolute loyalty, taxes, and exclusive military service to that suzerain.
So it's a formal contract?
Yes, and these treaties always had a specific format: a preamble, a history of their relationship, a list of rules, and a detailed list of the land being granted. The Book of Joshua is structured just like these legal contracts. God is the suzerain king, giving the land as a grant to his vassal, Israel.
Oh, wow.
So those endless lists of boundaries and obscure cities aren't just boring geography to skip over. They are the literal legal land grant. They are the receipt proving that the great king kept his ancient promises to Abraham.
That completely changes how you read it. It turns a boring map into a profound theological receipt. And speaking of structure, there is a brilliant secret hidden in the original language of the text that our sources brought to light.
Oh, the Hebrew wordplay.
Yes, the entire book is essentially divided into 4 main parts, and in Hebrew, the core theme of each part corresponds to a sound-alike wordplay.
It is a remarkable literary device, especially when you remember that this was originally an oral culture.
Right. Before everyone had a scroll in their pocket, these stories were memorized and recited. And auditory symmetry really helps memory. Just listen to this progression.
Go for it.
So the first part, chapters 1 through 5, is about crossing the Jordan River. The Hebrew word is a bar to cross. The second part, chapters 6 through 12, focuses on conquering the land. The word is lakach, to take.
Then the narrative shifts to the administration phase we just discussed. Chapters 13 through 21 describe the detailed distribution of the tribal territories. The Hebrew word there is kalak, to divide.
And finally, the conclusion of the book, chapters 22 through 24, where Joshua gathers all the tribes to renew their treaty and pledge their loyalty to God. The word is abad, to serve.
Beautiful symmetry.
Right, so you have abar, lakach, kalak, abad, cross, take, divide, serve. It's a perfectly symmetrical, memorable blueprint for how to inherit the promises of God.
This brings us to one final, deeply significant theological connection that the sources highlight, which bridges the ancient text to later historical theology.
What's that?
Well, when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek centuries later, a translation known as the Septuagint, the name Joshua, was translated into Greek. And when you read the New Testament, which was written in Greek, you find the exact same name. Joshua and Jesus are translated exactly the same. Iousus.
Wait, really? So to a Greek-speaking reader in the early Christian church, they were literally reading the book of Jesus.
They were. Both names fundamentally mean Yahweh is salvation. And because of this direct linguistic link and their deeply parallel roles in the grand narrative, historical Christian theology has long viewed Joshua as a type, a historical foreshadowing of Christ.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, just as the ancient Joshua led the Israelites through the waters of the Jordan, defeated the hostile powers of the land, and led them into their physical promised rest in Canaan, Christian theology sees Jesus leading humanity through the waters of baptism, defeating spiritual powers of sin and death, and leading his people into their ultimate, eternal, promised rest.
So what does this all mean for us today? I mean, we've covered rushing floodwaters, archaeological debates about pig bones, the crushing weight of ancient theocratic warfare, and hidden Hebrew wordplay.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. If we pull all the way back, the Book of Joshua is essentially a massive national memory-making project. It was meticulously written and compiled so people wouldn't forget who they were, where they came from, and most importantly, who their king was.
And this raises an important question for any reader, ancient or modern. It forces you to confront the foundation of your own identity.
It really does. And it leaves us with the provocative thought to ponder long after you finish listening today. It forces us to ask, how do the stories we tell about our own pasts, our personal victories, the struggles of our ancestors, our darkest moments, How do those specific curated memories shape the rules and the community we choose to live by today?
That's a great question.
What are the suzerainty treaties we have written in our own lives based on the history we choose to remember?
The enduring power of epic literature like Joshua is that it never actually stays in the past. It constantly demands a response in the present.
It absolutely does. Well, that brings us to the end of our time today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Joshua. We hope it gave you a completely fresh perspective on a highly complex and deeply fascinating text.
It's been a privilege unpacking this with you. Goodbye, everyone.
And as we sign off, I just want to explicitly say again, may God bless all of you listening. Have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.